You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Further to come on our program. Before the UN General Assembly convenes, Secretary General Guterres will host a climate action summit. How can the UN prove it is more than a talk shop? A topic that people talk a lot these days. We'll be back after this. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. The United Nations headquarters in New York will welcome world leaders and diplomats on Tuesday for the annual General Assembly debate. This year, 143 heads of state and government have been confirmed to speak there. But before that, the spotlight on Monday will be on climate change. World leaders will be attending the Climate Action Summit convened by the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres. As a special representative of Chinese President Xi Jinping, China's State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang is scheduled to address the Council around midday. For more on the UN General Assembly Climate Action Summit and more, we have in Washington, D.C., Saurabh Gupta, Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist at the Institute for China-American Studies. Joining us in London, Isabel Houghton, CEO and editor of ChinaDialogue.net. And last but not least in Beijing, Fu Jun, Academic Dean of the Institute for South-South Cooperation and Development at Peking University. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our program. How much should we expect consensus come together in a way on the climate change summit, as we are already seeing the summit convenes? Ms. Houghton, first, briefly.
Well, I think Gutierrez has said that this is an action summit and only those who have something concrete to put on the table are welcome. So that means Japan's not there, Australia's not there, Brazil's not there, the United States won't be there. Everyone who does come will be judged, I guess, by the scale of what they offer, because what the purpose of this summit is to speed up and focus action before the next COP in Santiago, and finally the one in the UK next year, at which point we will have had to have ramped up our targets very seriously if we're going to meet the long-term goal of 1.5 or 2 degrees. So it's a kind of, you know, we're not going fast enough, you've got to bring something, you've got to make concrete promises.
I see. Professor Fu, what about for you? Much consensus can be reached on the implementation of the aspiration.
Well, if you mean United States, the international system would also include the big players like the United States. The United States is out. So by that measure, it's the task is daunting. But China is a big part of the picture in terms of climate change, the challenge we face. But so far, China has been committed to the commitment that it has made. And it's not just words. China has sprung into actions, and China now contribute in terms of the renewable energy capacity globally, in terms of in the neighborhood of 25%, in terms of growth rates 40%. So China has been working hard, and now, very interestingly, China has promised to cap its emission rates by the year 2030. Now, there are signs that China probably will move that schedule. At that time, there was a report from the Nature saying that the carbon emission rates somehow plateaued around the year of 2030, and China stayed there at about 9.5 billion tons.
So
and then it started to decline a little bit. So that's very encouraging for the climate change matter.
Mr. Gupta, you're based in Washington. It seems that Professor Fu, based in Beijing, is all trying to suggest, one, the U.S. is dragging all of us down in terms of climate change actions. Second, China has been doing its bit, probably even more than what's originally planned. Do you think that is a real picture?
let me get to the view in Washington, and the view in Washington obviously is a pessimistic one till we have a new administration and an administration from a different party. I don't see anything changing substantially. To be frank, you know, on the yesterday's evening news on the main network channels, climate wasn't covered at all. I mean, there were other stories about the Ukraine investigation, about Trump and Biden, etc., etc., but climate never came up at all. And therefore, I mean, the degree to which this country prioritizes climate, at least at the federal level, is of course it's lacking, and it's a little unfortunate. The view in Washington also is, with regard to China, is it's a somewhat of a skewed view. It does not take into account how much China is doing, but it talks in terms of, you know, Chinese emissions are still going to increase. And so even if we in Washington do our part, that still is just going to be a minor part. And so at this point of time, it's just unfortunate that the U.S. is not playing its role as a full stakeholder in this debate and contributing as well as it could, unfortunately.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta, for that frank analysis of the reality there. But Ms. Hilton, so if those were the case, as all of you have illustrated, are we going to see for the very first time that the world will have the United States, the largest economy and the most powerful country, arguably speaking, and the pillar decades ago of international mechanism being absent from one of the most important missions of human being today, which is to work on a climate change? Will that set a different way of doing things for the world from now on, beginning from climate change issue? That's probably even more significant than just the climate change debate itself.
It's certainly a huge uncertainty in the process, and you know, as others have said, it's extremely damaging. It's not actually the first time. If you remember, the ratification of the Kyoto Protocol had a similar arc, that it was agreed to, but it didn't get through Congress. So the United States has been in and out of this process in a pretty unhelpful way. What is interesting is what happens when the United States is fully committed, as it was in advance of Paris. And then you had this really positive dynamic on this issue between the United States and China, with President Obama and Xi Jinping signing their cooperation agreement 2 years before Paris. That created a dynamic in which everybody got marshaled to participate. And what you see now with the United States stepping back and announcing its withdrawal is that it gives cover to other countries to behave badly. If the United States is in and it's using its kind of coercive muscle and its encouragement, very few smaller countries will drop out. And China, I think, would be also encouraged to be more ambitious. China will certainly meet its targets, and China's been doing a lot. But China at this point could be more ambitious. But I think that with the United States withdrawing and the trade war on top of that, everybody gets distracted. We're looking at a world recession. We're looking at all these things which can take attention away from climate. And that is, in a way, equally as damaging, because what we need to do is to focus on climate now.
That's absolutely a very important point, which is, has the priority of the world changed, Mr. Gupta? Now, we all remember during the Cold War, not many were talking about the climate change. Of course, at that time, maybe the effect of climate change was not as obvious as it is today when it comes to science evidence. But still, when priorities shift, or shall we say, immediate danger changes in someone's mind, will climate change still be one issue that can bring everybody together?
Well, I'd say yes and no. You know, ever since the global financial crisis and I would say the kind of plateauing or even the cratering of global growth and the lack of at least in the developed countries, for median wage growth, that has created a lot of anxiety in people, and they're very focused on checkbook, pocketbook issues rather than these grand I know climate is such an important issue, but at the same time it's looked at in a very abstract context and not a day-to-day issue that people need to be concerned about, because they're more concerned about their livelihood issues. And so, of course, priorities have changed in that regard. But I would also say that sitting here in Washington, the Democratic Party is very, very committed on this issue of climate change. And so if we do have a change in administration, I can absolutely see any and every Democratic candidate who's standing up there to be a nominee for the Democratic nomination also having a very strong message on climate change. And frankly, in the few avenues that they do have to hold the Trump administration on climate, and be honest, they're trying to utilize that. You know, we have the NAFTA, the new NAFTA, the US, Mexico, Canada agreement, and the Democrats want certain changes, and they're trying to really mainstream climate within that agreement as best as they can.
But Mr. Gupta, it's too much to ask the international community to wait until you have a change of government. After all, we have no right in vote one way or the other for your government, and it will be such a interesting thing to look at the world being taken hostage by an election in the United States, which is only one country out of the few hundred in the world. And the climate change issue, if we all agree, that's such a gigantic issue that everybody has to play a part. At least the reason why we talk about it has a lot to do with it. Also being taken hostage by politics of one nation. I know you have the similar minds with us, Mr. Gupta, but I just to try to figure out, you know, what's the next step, really? Professor Fu, the UN Secretary General, obviously one who knows the geopolitics the best, I guess, at this time of the world, is sitting down with the youngest activists when it comes to climate change issue from around the world here today in the UN General Assembly. Obviously, the message is, let's work for the future, and let's be responsible for our next generation. But the message is also, maybe the hope is more on the younger generation, as the current generation is being tied up with their selfish interests, as if all the global agenda wouldn't have an impact on their own economies. So, Mr. Fu, Professor, how do you see the messages behind the ways the climate change issues are being portrayed and discussed under the global context?
Well, the climate issue certainly is very abstract, and well, this is a challenge common to mankind. And the sad fact is the global system is such that the building blocks, the nation states, and the nation states to a certain extent will compete with each other. We do not have a central government. And that being the case, it is so critical for big powers to take the lead. Now there I have to argue strongly on behalf of China. We can talk and talk and talk, argue and argue. Eventually, you have to take actions. Now, the action the United States take in the area of climate change is withdrawal from a common pact, and this is very sad for mankind. And I hope that China will continue to be committed to the pact, and through its action, it can also encourage other big powers to be back on the wagon so that we can commonly fight against climate change. Now, the issue there, of course, is because of the issue of growth, development. And the word we use, now listen carefully, it's not equal share, but equitable share, common and equitable share of responsibility, common but differentiated responsibilities. After all, China being a developing country, and the rest of the world, many of the other countries being developing countries, and for them to grow, they have to go through a period of industrialization. So there you probably see the rise of carbon emission, but at the same time, what we should do more is, while we'll continue to have the growth story, at the same time, we need to work very hard to increase the efficiency of usage of energy and springing into action so that we shift very swiftly from a fossil-based energy structure to a non-fossil-based energy structure.
Okay, many of the issues you just mentioned, Professor Fu, has been debated for a long time, developing vis-a-vis developed economies, development stage, and also industrialization, one after another. These concepts at various climate change conferences. Isabel, you and I were talking about that also for years, if you trace back our last conversations. But you know, now it's not the time to reflect back, but rather a time to move forward. I guess that's the most important thing. From all of your perspectives, how will a remaining international community be able to pragmatically move to the next stage? We only have a minute and a half left, so how about 30 seconds for every one of you? Mr. Gupta, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay, let me go first. Let me just throw one idea out on this front. And this is, you know, I've been critical of the US out here, but I will say one thing where the climate proponents have not been absolutely frank, and that is in terms of what are the economic costs and the development related costs that the movement to such a climate, to such a new climate regime would cost. I think we need to do that because at the end of the day, these are all, you know, nationally determined contributions, and therefore it's at the national level that these actions need to be taken, and the trade-offs need to be made by politicians, and we need to have a more engaged debate of how can we have a, how can we protect the earth and at the same time have a better, and look at the development angle.
We got 1 minute less. Isabel, go ahead. 30 seconds for you.
Okay. Picking up on that, and China can play a really big part in this. I don't think that developing countries at this point should go through the heavy fossil fuel industrialization stage. Industrialization, yes, but not with fossil fuels. And China has done so much to facilitate a different path. I think that if China, as a development actor, which it also now is, would bend its energies towards helping emerging economies, helping poorer countries take the renewables route and not the coal route, then we would all get there much faster.
Okay, Mr. Fu, 30 seconds, maybe 20 seconds.
5 seconds. I encourage the United States to come back to the matter of climate change and really to take a leadership role in world affairs.
I hope what you're saying is not wishful thinking. For now, I want to thank the three of you for joining us and helping us understand better. Professor Fu Jun, Ms. Isabel Hilton, and Mr. Gupta. Thank you so much for joining us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching and tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.